Just going to introduce you there, Warren, in case you can hear me. Hey, everyone. So I'm just letting you know that we're just, Warren's just waiting to figure out, he might have some issue with his audio. I could hear him, but anyways, I'm just waiting for him to clarify on his end. And we do have him here for the discussion. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't late going live on the stream. Just give me 1 second there, folks. Can you hear me yet, Warren?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, you're just a little quiet, but I'll turn my audio up just a little bit here.
Okay, yep.
There we go. That should be good. All right. So at first, I just want to say I just hit the live now, so we are live. I was going to go a couple minutes before we did, but figured might as well just do it while we're on screen. And rather than I kind of have some understanding of who you are, your background to a degree, but rather than me offer it, maybe if you just want to take a couple minutes before we start into this discussion. Your background, what position you take, why you came to MMT, and just lay a little groundwork for the people to know about a little something about yourself.
Okay, so my background is the financial sector, and I'd like to look into my camera, wherever that is. Is that? Am I looking into the camera now?
Yep.
Okay, so I started my first job in banking was 1973. And I went to Wall Street in 1976. I worked at Bankers Trust. They were a primary dealer. I was on the dealer desk there. I was actually, they made me vice president in charge of sales and trading of Ginnie Mae securities, which were the hot new derivatives at the time. And I got to know, of course, everything that goes on at a primary dealer and at the desk. And that's where I started developing these ideas or being made aware of them as I became aware of how the actual payment system worked, how banking worked. It all just came together in my mind as just an understanding of overall monetary operations. From there, I went to 1978. I went to William Blair and Company. They were one of my clients. They hired me to start their fixed income arbitrage department, which I did. And I left Blair in 1982, I started my own company called AVM Securities and III Securities. It was a fixed income arbitrage and a fixed income broker dealer, and William Blair was a partner with me. And I moved it to Florida in 1984. William Blair the company continued to be a partner for a few years, and then that company still exists. I turned it over to my partners at the end of 1998, after I managed it for the first 25 years. We were had the #1 performance record of any fixed income manager in the world, as we were #1 on managed account reports, report that would come out monthly, and we had the top performance for the 5-year, the 10-year, and 15-year performance records. In 15 years of fixed income arbitrage, we didn't have a single losing trade, for example, so it was a pretty good run. And from there, I had bought a controlling interest in a small bank, and I stayed with that for a while. And then that was sold in 2013. And I moved to St. Croix in U.S. Virgin Islands in 2003. Part of the terms of my exit from III and AVM in 1990, at the end of 1997, was that I would be able to continue from anywhere I wanted. I gave up 90% of I gave up my interest. I retained a 10% interest in the company, and I still have a 10% residual interest at this point in time.
So you were working from home before it even became popular, apparently.
Yeah, I guess you could say
that. Right on. Well, anyways, like I say, I really appreciate you taking the time today, Warren, to come and join me on this live stream, because as a libertarian, especially a Canadian libertarian, which is almost like an oxymoron. Right? But I already feel enough out in the weeds, out in the, well, neither left nor right field, to be honest with you. Somewhere out in the Netherlands, apparently, as compared to a lot of my peers. And what I've understood over the years, now we'll be definitely getting into some historical precedent in terms of monetary policy and all that. But my biggest thing is today, from generations, like I'm from a Gen X. I would assume you're a baby boomer. I would assume, correct?
Yeah, 1949.
Right. So, and then you got the millennials and now Gen Z. So you got 4 generations alive today.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to perspectives and opinions from people from all areas, because that's the thing. It's not just political persuasion or your preference in terms of your ideology, or even if you're religious. It's how it affects generations and demographics, because that all plays a key role too when you're talking about economics and value and stuff. And there's definitely a lot of people out there who are massively. If there's one thing I could say, that no matter if you're talking about people on the left, the right, people who are disenfranchised, the youth, the one thing that I see that most people share today, or at least, and yeah, most, not all, obviously, is that most people are just, they see the system. They don't necessarily understand it, but the current system that they're functioning under, a lot of people are recognize it seems more or less like a rigged system, where it's benefiting certain people and being quite a detriment to others. And that's the area where, like I say, where I see where there's new up and comers or people such as yourself, like in the MMT school, who are trying to come out and I think what you're trying to do is be descriptive in terms of understanding, because you do come from finance and banking in general, to try to be descriptive in terms of the current monetary policy and how it's set up and structured, and then maybe prescriptive in terms of advocating for some things that may be able to be changed in some manner, some way on the monetary policy side of things, to maybe better reflect, or to me be more, I don't know, that's one thing. Actually, let me just ask you, what is the goal of MMT at the end of the day? Like what is the, when you come up with this monetary theory, like what is your ultimate goal if it was to be implemented?
Right. So it's to promote the correct understanding of monetary operations, how the currency works, how the monetary system works, which I think and already will radically change the debate. And the same issues will be debated, whether or not money should be spent here or there. But the reasons for spending or not spending will be very different. And I think we'll get better public policy overall if we have an informed electorate, rather than now where we have a misinformed electorate and we have a misinformed leadership. So we've got everybody misinformed about how it works, making decisions. And I think I'd prefer to live in a world where we're making informed decisions.
Right. Okay. So what I like to do when I start and have a conversation, debate, or anything with someone, is I like to set up the parameters, at least, so that and the most important parameter I would suggest is actually acknowledging the actual descriptive language, the labels, and the terms of these words that we use. So that to me is a big, because one thing I've noticed, and actually is not only extremely inefficient, but is
Oh, I just lost you. You're
sorry. I cut out real quick there. Sorry. My internet's not the greatest. I'm waiting for my Starlink set up, but not yet. But anyway, so like I say, because the big thing I've noticed is a lot of people, when you're talking about whether it's fiscal or monetary policy, or even when you're talking in terms of capitalism or socialism, is you hear a lot of people using these words and these terms. They toss them around a lot, but they don't really properly represent their actual inherent meaning. Now, for me, I don't try to reinvent any words. I go by what the proper definition, the meaning of these words are, because that's from what I gather, especially if you're from a Western country and you were raised under the Western, our typical education system, and the understanding of the English language. If you have clarity of language, that gives clarity of thought. And that's where I've seen the biggest problem is people that don't have that clarity of language, which doesn't give them the clarity of mind to know what they're actually talking about. Now, I would just say, first and foremost, because I have been watching your videos and some of your lectures, and I even watched the debate you had there with Robert Murphy from the Austrian School, right? And so I've been paying attention, but to me, it's like I say, it's the number one thing I hear that you keep advocating. The problem is, this is the one thing that concerns me, I think, the most, is like the definition of government is force. It's a monopoly of force or violence in the particular geographical landmass. And I'm not sure. Well, I've heard that you basically acknowledge that, correct?
Well, the whole, in fact, it's all based on coercive taxation. Without that, government doesn't have the ability to provision itself.
Right, exactly. So,
Yeah,
and that's the area. And like I say, I understand descriptively how
yeah,
you pointed some of the areas out in the past, and you've even acknowledged there's been some obvious failures in the past. And I guess my initial question, since you at least agree that government is, a monopoly of force, I'm just curious, and I'm genuinely curious here, sincerely, why would anyone that's an advocate of actual at least getting people out from the current system or the current structure that seems to economically enslave entire generations, is why you would want to replicate or duplicate that, even if there is some tweaking or changing in terms of the policy, you're still placing,
yeah.
in the hands of. Now, I'm sure Warren, you might have some good ideas, like you as the person, but once again, you're advocate for government, which you're going to place, even if you have great ideas. Let's say your MMT comes up with a great theory and has great ideas. You're still advocating for placing that theory or control of that monetary theory or that monetary policy in the hands of people who seek to use force as their means to an end. And that's kind of an area where I find where I take issue, right? So I don't know, maybe if you want to respond to that.
Well, I don't know that I'm advocating for that. What I'm doing is describing it. And once people understand how that force is there, how it's being applied, then I think they'll make more intelligent decisions about what to do next. Or, again, an informed electorate, for me, is better than an uninformed electorate. Now, I've spoken to a lot of people, and they said, they listen, they say, well, look, if everybody understood what you were talking about, all kinds of bad things would happen. And what they're saying is that the country will run better with people who are uninformed than people who are informed. Now, I can't argue with that, but it certainly is a difference of opinion, though.
Right. Well, I mean, from my perspective, I can't speak for anyone else, but from my perspective, it's always been the pretense of what right down to the core of liberty which is I think the most important fundamental aspect of the human experience, is to be free from forced subjugation or any kind of economic slavery. And to me, once again, that always has come as a consequence or result of government. Governments have always been, whether you're talking about a dictator, a monarch, or a republic, or a democracy, or a parliamentary democracy. Sorry, go ahead.
I like to talk about it as collective action. Like there's time for place for individual action, and there are other times where you have to have collective action. So
for sure. But it's the introduction of force, right? It's the minute someone is proverbially or threatening with the gun to the head. That's usually the area where I take the biggest issue, is because what I've always understood, and not just in terms of understanding micro or macroeconomic theories, but even in, like I say, even in my own personal life, is, put it this way, I've raised two sons that are both, 29 and 26 respectively. Now, I could have, like a lot of other parents, I could have used force, and a lot of parents do, right? Hypocritical language and constantly using force, like, because might does make right, and some 3 or 4 times the size of them. I have that inherent power. I have that, authority over them. But what I've understood is there's some loose ends if you're not constantly micromanaging, but you end up as a consequence and a better result, or at least anecdotally for me and anyone else that I've ever seen who's practiced like voluntary means and not using force, coercion, or violence as a means to end. I find in my own personal situation and personal setting that has worked out. I think my sons have turned out to be tremendously superior. Of course, it's just subjective in my opinion, but I would ask you anyone to compare them to a lot of other people who were raised with violence or force as the means to an end, and you would probably come to realize they're much better people. They're the kind of people you'd probably want to have as your neighbors, whereas the ones that's advocating for force, you don't know if you can trust those kind of people, right?
Yeah. Well, look, the problem is, let's say you want to have a military as a government, and can you rely solely on volunteers, or who are unpaid volunteers, or do you have to have some form of coercion to have a successful military? If you want a legal system, can you somehow have volunteers who will come out to do this rather than using our monetary system? So the government has set up a monetary system, which I point out is, in the first instance, the reason for that monetary system is to provision the government with public health, with soldiers, with legal system. That's what the monetary system does. Now, if you have some other way to get these people in government, fine. But otherwise, we're stuck with a monetary system.
Right. Well, what you were saying in terms of you need government for the or forced to have a military, what I would suggest, if you go back to the founding of the U.S., actually the American founders actually understood instinctively because of their past relationship over and across the pond, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't set up a standing army. Actually, it was set up so that you didn't actually have a standing army, because they recognized that usually that it cannot just be used as an outwards force, to fend off external threats, but it can also be used.
Look, if it's decided that we don't need a standing military, that we don't need a legal system, then we don't need a government currency to provision those aspects of government, then we shouldn't have one. I'm not trying to make that decision.
If someone any foreign country, or even domestic or foreign, any threat that comes to my door, I have an automatic incentive just by the fact that I want to live, right? To defend, and I want my children to live. There's already an automatic incentive structure without any government, without any top-down mandates or regulations or impositions or edicts for me to want to defend myself. And I would suggest that is the case for almost every human being. The ones that don't, well, if you're unwilling to defend yourself, well, I mean, it's a sad reality, but that's kind of how nature works, right?
I mean, if you have a militarized state today that invades a state that doesn't have a standing army, you can argue who's going to win. Okay, and you might argue
not necessarily, because you got to remember, America won. Like, the king with all of his organized army units couldn't defeat a bunch of ragtag militias.
Right. So I'm not arguing who's going to win, but if it's decided, if there's not enough collective, that we don't need collective action, if there's not enough support for collective action for defense, then fine, there isn't any defense. What I'm saying is, once you've decided there is a reason for collective action, and then you need to provision the entity that's going to provide that collective action. How do you do that? Okay, and the way we've chosen to do it is with a coercive monetary system. If we don't have to do that, okay, there have been places that don't have coercive monetary systems, not anything of the size and scale of today's nation states, or even in the past thousands of years. All I'll say, state organized nation states have used coercive monetary systems. They've used coercive taxation to provision their governments. If there's another way to do it, fine. I mean, that should be part of the debate. But I'm here to explain how these coercive monetary systems work, so that within that context, informed decisions can be made.
Right. Okay. Well, another quick question, because like I say, so we've covered the definition, obviously, that government is force, it's a monopoly of force. And the other thing I would think is the most important thing, especially if anyone's going to listen to this, is the meaning, the definition, the proper definition, as far as I'm concerned, of what money is actually supposed to be, what money is supposed to represent.
Yeah, well, I don't talk about what it's supposed to be. I talk about what it is right now. And the US dollar is nothing more than a tax credit. It's a thing that the government demands for payment of taxes. The yen is a tax credit, the euro is a tax credit. That's all today's floating exchange rate currencies are tax credits. No matter what they should be or what they would have been, that's what they are.
Right. Well, but that's what I'm suggesting. So if we want to get outside of it, and I would suggest, well, you would at least acknowledge that you're not happy with the current system. I would assume.
Well, what I'm saying is, starting with the idea that the currency is there to provision the government, the most effective way to get that done is to impose coercive taxation, and then the currency becomes the tax credit, and that forces the rest of the motion to happen.
Well, it's okay, but anyway, I just want to, from my side of things, as far as I know, and under any historical context, and anyone ever, and like I say, I'm not dogmatic in any particular school of economics. Like I say, I've looked into monetarism, like Milton Friedman. I've looked into classical economics, your typical Adam Smith and such, and then you got your Keynesians, and then you've got your Austrian economics. But to me, like I said, the most important thing for me to understand, because as anything that I produce and provide in society, it is something that has a value. It has an actual value. So to me, what money is supposed to represent is a measure of that value. Just like, if we're trying to build a home, you need to have a measurement in terms of whether you're using the metric system or the standard system.
You use the word supposed to be, but that's not what it is right now. Right now, it's just a tax credit that happens to function that way to some degree. Maybe not to the degree you'd like it to, but right now it's a tax credit. We can talk about what gives tax credits value, and that's what gives the money value.
Kind of both, right? Because people, typical people in society are genuinely using it as a means to measure value, to exchange value, and not doing much in terms of retaining it anymore.
Yeah.
But if you want to stick that dollar under your mattress, even though it might only be worth 50 cents in years, but it is still what most people in society, other than, like I say, other than central planners, most people in society use money based on those three definitions as a medium to measure their value, what they produce and provide in society, and as a means to exchange that value, and as a medium to retain that value. And basically what you're suggesting now, and I agree with you, central bankers in conjunction with government and policy are basically the ones that are completely dictating what a person's worth is and what you're...
Well, all right, so look, let's take a screwdriver, okay? A lot of people use screwdrivers in a lot of ways that aren't the main function of a screwdriver. I open up a can of paint, and I say, I use it to break up ice, and I wish screwdrivers should have points on them so I could break up ice better. Well, they're made specifically to do this job, and as an ancillary effect, we use them for all kinds of things. So what we have is a state currency that all the government cares about in the first instance is, will this thing allow me to have soldiers, will it allow me to have public health officials, will it allow me to have public education, will allow me to have a legal system, which you may want or not want, but that's somehow been collectively decided. And it has to function to do that first. Otherwise, the rest doesn't matter. So what we have are these tax credits that function to do that first. Now, in addition, there are all these other uses that come about that are side effects that are maybe even compelled because this is the tax credit. And then we can go from there to see what can be done about making other things, more compatible with this coercive force of government that is using this tool to provision itself.
Well, I'm just curious, why would you not advocate? Because if you're kind of disenfranchised with the current system, why wouldn't you want to advocate for, or what do you take issue with something that actually has sound money properties? Whether you're talking about using a commodity such as gold or silver, or now today it's a completely different iteration. I'm trying to learn about it too, but cryptocurrencies, at least such as Bitcoin, where there actually has to be some kind of proof of work to show that there is at least some work provided, and to measure or to maintain or to figure out that value in some method or some way. I'm just curious why those would be completely decentralized. Silver and gold. If you want any individual, if you want to go out and prospect and paying for gold, if you can buy some property or find some area where you can go and someone gives you the permission, you can go and create and earn your own wealth.
Sure.
And same with cryptocurrencies today, where you can step outside of having any government centrally plan and control or devalue your worth. So I'm just curious, have you ever looked into any of these other? Well, obviously you're familiar with gold and silver.
Sure.
But why are you? I would assume, actually, I'm just kind of assuming here, but are you against something like a gold standard or a silver, like something where it's actually tied to a tangible commodity in some way that could restrain?
Okay, so there are consequences to tying tax credits, tying the dollar to gold. Mm-hmm. And I can show you the consequences, and then you can decide whether you want to do it or not. So, and I wrote a paper on that where, what did I call it? I called it exchange rate policy, which is fixed or floating, and full employment. And it shows that with fixed exchange rate policy, which is a gold standard or something like that, the state loses its ability to sustain full employment. Now, all our output, all our real wealth is based on people working and producing things. There is nothing that isn't, based on work and output from labor of one kind or another. So if you've got 10% unemployment, you're losing 10% of your potential output. So is that the trade-off? Is it worth not having full output potential all the time to have your currency tied in value to gold? Maybe to some people it is. I don't know. Now, if you don't do that, like we are now, you can sustain full employment at all times. You can have maximum real output in your economy managed, and you can allow people to buy all the gold and silver and Bitcoin they want. There's no restriction on you having that. Nobody has to save in dollars. You can save in whatever you want. So we're given the freedom by not pegging to any of these currencies, we're given the freedom to save in anything we want. And so those are the choices. You decide. If you decide gold, fine. Then you vote for somebody who wants gold.
Well, in terms of like what you were mentioning, in terms of the full employment, actually in Canada, it's very, very much aligned. Certain parts of this country in particular, very much aligned with that kind of train of thought. And I remember back even in the 90s, and it's happened even subsequent, is we have our province furthest to the east. It's an island all by itself, Newfoundland. And unemployment was so bad at certain points in time after the 80s, when you had the big ramp up in the interest rates and stuff, and things went pretty sour there for a while. But there was times in the 90s where there was government was basically doing something akin to what you're suggesting, which is to create some area of full employment, because they recognized the people were getting time for the pitchforks to come out. So they actually were paying people. And I had a couple of friends that were newfies that I met up in Ontario that actually did it themselves, where the government would literally go pay you to go down to the shore and pick up rocks that were mixed in with the sand and just move them to a different area.
Yeah. And
they were still, they didn't make the beach any cleaner. They just were basically, it was almost like a make work program. Now, for me, what I would suggest is that seems like a massive waste of not just human resources, but that the currency that would have been issued that was basically squandered for nothing more than rocks moving from one place from the shore to the other, right? And there was nothing genuinely productive. The people, now they did get, like I say, money to buy things, but because that money was artificially stimulated and created by way of fiat, that the underlying factors of that was that people they lost the grip on what tangible value actually meant, which is why today you're seeing a lot of people don't actually understand what value is, because if you believe that you can just create value by typing numbers on a screen, which is basically what government does, that might benefit some people. Like I've even said before, if I had a printing press in my basement, I for sure that's going to benefit me and anyone else that I'm willing to share those dollars, right?
Well, I never proposed a policy like that. But government can do things even more wasteful than that. Okay.
For sure.
Okay,
for sure.
That's nothing compared to the waste government can do.
Right.
All right, but let's talk about unemployment for a minute, and let's talk about the money story.
Okay.
So, and I'll just talk about my money story, what's become to be known as the MMT money story, which is the money story that applies to today's governments, not to somebody landing on a desert island or whatever. That's all fine. I'm not going to argue those work or don't work, but I'm telling you, this is the current money story. And a good analogy or an example of what happened was the Europeans, when they went into Africa not that long ago, wanted people working there to come work for them on their plantations. They maybe wanted to grow coffee. Okay, so how do you get people to do that? Well, you can offer your local currency, your pounds or your francs, but nobody would walk away from their village and go work for those things on the coffee field. So what they did was they imposed what the British called a hut tax. They put a tax on everybody's hut that they lived in. And they came up with some new script for it, like the crown. You got to pay 100 crown a month tax or something like that. Or we're going to burn your house down. Okay, so it sounds like your force, right? And they had the British military right there. And the French did the same thing. Okay, so what happened when they did that? These people who had never heard of a crown, nobody else had either, suddenly they need 100 crown a month. Suddenly they're saying, well, what do we have to do to get these? We don't want our house burned down. You've got the guns on us, but we want to be good citizens here. Well, if you come to the coffee fields, we'll pay you 10 crown a day to work growing coffee. And they said, okay, fine. And certain number of members would go down and maybe work for a month and earn more than enough to pay their tax. And then they'd buy things from other people in the village who would sell them services, take care of the kids or whatever. But the economy would earn enough overall to pay the tax, at least enough, or else somebody's house is going to get burned down. Okay, so you follow, and this is what they did for a long time. Okay, and they're still doing it today in some of these spots. Okay, so last I heard, the French system is only now being challenged or something. This is what they did. So, right up your alley, coercive government for the further purpose of provisioning that government that wants you to go grow coffee. And it's very effective. Now, what they if you go now look at this system, a couple of things. What was the purpose of the tax? The purpose of the tax was not to get money from the people living. The purpose of the tax was to cause them to need the money to seek work that was paid in that money that only the British had. They have a monopoly on that money. They're the single supplier of the thing they're demanding as payment. Now they can tell people what they have to do to get the money. Oh, you want money so we don't go burn your house down? Fine, you come work in coffee plantations and we'll give you so many crown a month, a day, 10 crown a day. All right, so in the first instance, the purpose of that tax is to create let's talk definition, what we define as unemployment, people looking for paid work that pays in that currency. So the purpose of the tax, and it does it very effectively, is to create unemployment. It created a village of unemployed who now are desperately looking for paid work so they don't get their houses burned down to survive. All right, and so they go down and look for work. So number one, where did the unemployment come from? The government created it. What was there before the government created this unemployment? There was no unemployment. You go to any non-monetary society, there are no people looking to earn money. There isn't any money. Okay, there's no tax. They have some form of collective action where they'll get together for the harvest or to go hunting and share it or whatever, just like you talk about, but there's no unemployment. The grandmother isn't unemployed. She's helping take care of the kids. If they're farming and somebody discovers a tractor out of nowhere, you don't need as many people plowing the fields, you don't have unemployment. They're doing something else. There's always more in life to do than there are people to do it. Okay, so number one, taxation is there by design to create unemployment for the further purpose of the government hiring the people that its taxation caused to be unemployed. All right, so if there's any unemployment around you, you know why it's there. It's there because the government has put a tax structure on the economy that's created more employment than the people it wanted to employ. It's the government has full responsibility for what we define as unemployment, and it just wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the government policy. Right, and then now the other interesting thing is, if the total tax in that village, if there were 100 huts and there were 100 crown a month, 100 times 100, the total tax bill would be 10,000 crown a month that needed to be paid. People would come and look for work in the coffee plantations, and the total earnings would be more than the 100,000. Okay, it has to be. It can't be any less, or somebody's getting their house burned down. They'd run down and look for work. Okay, but people wanted to earn more than just enough because they wanted to save. Now, why did they want to save? Well, in case they got sick, they couldn't work the next month, or the wife lost them in the wash and they had to get some more, or whatever reason. Economies either save zero or they save something. You can't have negative savings. It means the tax isn't getting paid. Somebody's getting their house burned down, and that will compel somebody to show up for work. So the British always spent more than they collected. Okay, the other reason they want savings is because merchants sprung up, because some people were buying things from others, and there'd be stores and intermediaries and stockbrokers and everything else that shows up when you have a monetary system. And they need cash in the cash register. People wanted to make change, and they wanted cash in their pockets, and you give your kids lunch money for school. There's all of these reasons to have a money supply, right? You don't have a monetary economy with no money supply. So the basic money supply were the crown that the British spent that hadn't yet been used to pay taxes. People earned more than they wanted. The British spent more than they collected. Today we call that deficit spending. All right, now let's look at the sequence. The sequence that every congressman would imagine is, the British would have to get money through taxing to be able to pay the people. Wrong. Everybody in the village know that was not what was going on. They put a tax liability first, which caused people to work, get paid, and then the tax gets paid. Right? So they would pay the people first, and then the tax could be paid. It's the same thing today. Close examination of the Federal Reserve and our monetary system shows that our government spends first, and then out of those dollars that it spends, some are used to pay taxes and some are not. And those that are not are saved. They become part of what I call the net money supply, which is a very precise definition that people can understand. And those dollars that are spent that haven't been used to pay taxes can be held in several different forms that the government makes available. It can be cash in what they call reserve accounts at the Federal Reserve. It can be Treasury securities, which is cash in a savings account at the Federal Reserve. When you buy a Treasury security, you give them money, you get it back later with interest. That's called a savings account. Or it can be in green pieces of paper, which are tax credits that you can carry around. So it's the same dollars. They're either cash reserve. Okay, the public debt are the dollars spent by the government that haven't yet been used to pay taxes. We have the sequence backwards. If you take away nothing else from this discussion, think sequence. Every congressman thinks he has to get money from us to be able to spend. He has to tax or borrow from somebody or he can't spend. All right?
Well,
it's the opposite. It's the opposite. They have to spend first. Otherwise, we don't have the money to pay taxes or buy their bonds. They've got it wrong. Now, everybody in the Federal Reserve knows this.
Well, what you're doing though is, and sorry for interrupting, but what you're doing is, and you're correct in that analysis, but it's as a consequence of the constant government intervention in the economy, which has destroyed the free market and people's ability to actually save, retain, and actually create and measure their own value based on market.
So, well,
right?
yeah, I'm not disagreeing with other forms of value. I'm just talking about dollars. Okay, all the dollars that can be used to pay taxes come only from the government, or else they're called counterfeit. You're not allowed to print your own up. Okay, or the government's agent.
There you go, right there. That's an area actually I wanted to get into. Is so why that's the thing that I can't quite understand why you would be a proponent of the government having this ability to monopolize.
I'm not a proponent of. I'm not a proponent of it. I'm explaining how they do it.
Right, but wouldn't MMT also rely on government basically having access to the printing press and being able to arbitrarily?
No, MMT isn't a thing that relies on anything. It's a framework for analysis. If I tell you how the Russian nuclear program works, that doesn't mean I'm advocating Russia should have a nuclear program.
But it's from what I gather, and this is maybe where there could be some clarification. Is MMT is both descriptive and prescriptive?
Okay, so let's clarify that.
Yeah.
MMT is not prescriptive. MMT is a descriptive framework. I include in my description what I call a base case for analysis, because you have to start somewhere. So I'll start with the simplest case I can think of is the British with Africa. That's the simplest case, for example. Or Pompeii, I might pick that. But you start with a base case for analysis, and then you can give me reasons why that should be modified. That's fine. But you have to start from somewhere.
Right.
And so I start with a government that wants to provision itself. It does it in the simplest way. Here's the package. This is what we observe. This is what we can see as a logical construct of a government that wants to use coercive taxation to provision itself. And then we can take it from there if we want to change what we have, or throw it all away, tear it up. I'm not saying you can't do that.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Your turn.
Well, I'm just curious because, like I say,
let's look at government right now. What I'm saying is they've got the sequence backwards. The funds to pay taxes, the dollars that can pay taxes or buy government bonds, can only come from the government through its agents. And government it's not the president; it's all the agents. Yeah.
But that's basically only because they've removed any citizen from the country, both Canada and the U.S. I'll use Canada and the U.S. in particular because that's where I'm living. But they basically removed our ability. Like we have to pay, anything in Canadian in the
exactly. You've got it. Okay, so Canada.
That's because government is basically forcing me.
Yes. Okay.
Where there are people, and I'll just say this right now, even alive today, there are people who do function outside the current.
Yes, absolutely. But
go ahead.
That doesn't change what I just said. The Canadian dollars to pay Canadian taxes, as prescribed by the government, which you may approve of or not approve of, but this is how it is: the tax liability on your house. Those Canadian dollars can only come from the government of Canada through its agents, and they control that flow through its agents. It's a monopoly of supply of tax credits to satisfy their tax liabilities. They've got you on both sides.
Yeah.
Okay. Every MP in Canadian Parliament has that backwards. They all think they have to get the Canadian dollars from the private sector to be able to spend them. They have to tax them, or they have to borrow them, or they don't have them to spend. They think the sequence starts with dollars somehow being generated in the private sector. It doesn't. It can't, as a point of logic. Okay, they come from credits that the Bank of Canada makes to reserve accounts for Canadian banks. It's a simple changing of numbers in an account. It initiates, it comes from the government.
Yeah, let me just respond to that, because
Yeah.
but the issue obviously I take with that is, yes, government issuing currency, what you're describing there, yes, but that's actually what's destroying
Okay,
the
well,
person.
before we get to whether it's destroying or not, which I'm not saying it isn't,
Right.
but let's understand that we've got a world that has this sequence backwards. And what MMT did when it came along is it set the sequence right. And when the members of parliament understand that the Canadian dollars originate with them, come from them, the ones that they then collect and tax, that's why they call it a tax return. That's why it's called a revenue. It reverts back. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, okay? Everybody used to always know this, that the government would spend its token and then people would have to return it to the government. If you weren't able to return it, you'd lose your house or your car. They knew the sequence. In the last couple of 100 years only is when this knowledge has been lost. And MMT is just restoring this lost knowledge of how this coercive government is functioning.
Well, I'm actually really happy that that knowledge is being lost, and new minds are developing new ideas and concepts in terms of how freedom and economics is supposed to play. And I actually believe that the people who are doing that are doing a great service for not just people alive today, but for promoting human liberty, going forward. I personally, I wanted to get out and as far away from central planners or anyone in government having the ability to use force or taxation, which is theft, as a means to pick and choose who's the winners or losers in the economy, and to actually destroy the value of anything that I produce or provide as a consequence or result of my labor or my intellect.
Well, I'd like to hear any alternative you might have, but what you want to do is make sure you understand how the government today is working. So the number one takeaway from this for MMT is it's about sequence. They've got the sequence backwards, and now all the schools of economics are recognizing that in the last year. They've all come around.
Let me just push back a little bit on that, because it kind of goes back to the Keynesian model, because even Maynard Keynes at the time, right? Everyone even said, well, hey, it's the idea of Keynes, it's a terrible, like we get the fallibility and the consequence of government being the final arbiter and dispenser of economic prosperity. Well, but they recognize the time is, well, it's I guess the best of the least popular choices. And at the time, and that's why they even some of the Austrian economists or even other people have said since then is, I guess we're all Keynesian now. But that's the problem. Once you've literally severed any ties that restrains government, which is what the commodities such as gold or silver used to do, but once you've removed those restraints entirely, that's actually brought us to the place today why people are looking to create entire new monetary systems entirely, not just yourself, but people in the cryptocurrency spaces and smart contracts and blockchains, trying to get out from underneath this kind of centralized control, because they recognize that Keynesianism was actually maybe a good stopgap measure for the time. And no doubt, if you were alive at that particular time, you definitely benefit from it. Go 2 or 3 generations out.
Well, let me just say one thing.
Yeah, sure.
Keynes had the sequence backwards. The Austrians have the sequence backwards. All these people had the sequence backwards. That's the first thing we're pointing out. Look, you've got this whole thing, but you've got the sequence backwards. So I'm trying to work through what MMT is. We're still on number 1. It's about sequence. So now the next thing MMT has pointed out is that coercive taxation is the point of force of this monopoly that causes unemployment by design. So if you're going to come up with some alternatives, understand that and understand how you're going to provision government without doing this. You have to come up with an alternative means of provisioning government, which is
I don't ever want to provision government. I'm a libertarian.
But I consider myself, and maybe the semantics are different, actually a libertarian, where I think we do need collective action for certain things. Now, maybe there are people who think we never need collective action.
But when you say collective action, the problem is and that's to me, it comes across as like, but we just acknowledged earlier that government is force and taxation is theft. So collective action is I mean, again, steal my car. That's a collective action, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
You have to understand that that's also inherently immoral and unethical. And once again, what I'm concerned about is if you're advocating for placing, like, listen, I'm not even, tell you the truth, as a libertarian, and because I understand like psychology to a certain degree, I understand the Austrian school. to me, I could function under whether it's full on, statism or complete anarchy. To me, I'll function under either scenario or situation. The problem is though, is as each generation grows up and forgets what, function under anything that remotely resembles freedom or actual, based on our individual choice, these collective actions, it's constantly seeking and destroying the individual. And there is no such thing. Like collective action is just a bunch of individuals. We're all individuals. Now we can all choose to come together voluntarily, or something that is considered a collective action. But anything the government does, I don't do it. I don't, pay my taxes because I voluntarily choose to. I am forced to.
Just for building a concept, I consider collective action the broadest, the most general form of government, the most fundamental form of government, where people get together to do something. I consider that as the basis of the concept. No, I'm not.
Maybe this is a point of clarity that I think might help.
Yeah, that's a starting point. To me, that's a starting point.
Yeah, no, but maybe you have only talked. I'm not sure because I know Robert Murphy. He would probably still be in the political camp in terms of libertarianism. Me, what I would say is I'm philosophically a libertarian, and what I do is I extrapolate those fundamental principles that is libertarian thought. And that philosophy, which is self-ownership, property rights, and the non-aggression principle. And once you extrapolate from those ideas, universalize them, then you get to the point where and it's actually provable, so that for anyone that's critical thinking about this, is government it's a completely fictional construct, right? You can't even create anything that's called legitimate government. Just like in the old days, like you say, render under Caesar. Now people surely believe that Caesar was their rightful ruler during the Roman times, but no one alive today would say, and matter of fact, foolishly and naively, most people would say, oh, I would never agree to that. Now, if they were raised in that environment, they might be indoctrinated into believing that Caesar is their rightful ruler as well, right? Because you get certain thought leaders in society that
look at Europe, where all the leaders were claimed descendants from God, and they believe that.
Right. So to me,
look, what part of the United States? What part of the United States has the least effective government, the most disorganized government? What would you guess? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's where I am right now. It's where I am right now, and where I'm not going to move from. The U.S. Virgin Islands.
Virgin Islands, right.
Yeah, you talk about if that end of the spectrum compared to government in the rest of the states. This is it. So look, we're not okay, but we still have, cause for collective action. And whether you call it government or whether you call it a group of people getting together to do something for some common purpose, to me, we need that. Maybe you don't call that government. That's fine. Let's call it something else.
Yeah, you can't really. That's why, like I said.
So I won't call it government. I won't call it government. So what I start as is we need collective action. So what are the things we need collective actions for? And one of the big things that we need collective action for is to work against what I call races to the bottom. Are you familiar with those?
Yep.
What they call race to the. So if you go to a football game, and if you stand up, you can see better. But if everybody stands up, nobody can see better, and nobody can sit down. So there's cause for collective action to say, all right, look, you can only stand up for 15 seconds or something and then sit down or something like that. Otherwise, and we're all better off if we do that. And there has to be some kind of enforcement. You get somebody drunk who won't sit down. You got to do something about it, whether you get 4 or 5 people to move them away or bring in a helicopter and take them out. I don't know. But, you got to collectively come up with some solution to disrupting what is making it. So we have states in the U.S. Now they are government, and I'm not saying we should have states, but we do. And the federal government has when they set up the federal government, they were left to compete with each other and develop what I call these races to the bottom that only the federal government can stop. So for example, before we had federal emissions rules, and I'm not saying we've got the best federal emission rules, believe me, I'm not saying that. I've been banging my head against the wall with a lot of stupidity, okay? So don't put me in a position of defending that stuff. But before we had that, now it was the state that allowed the most pollution, got the most businesses, got the most money, okay? And so we had this race to the bottom, and it didn't stop until rivers in Ohio started catching fire. And then at that point, there was collective action to say, okay, we have minimum standards for the states. Today we have something similar going on where the states compete with each other for businesses by giving tax breaks. And the state that gives the most tax breaks gets the most businesses. Well, how do you get the most tax? How do you give the most tax breaks? Well, you spend the least on education, or you spend the least on your roads or something. And so the states that are most starved for public services get the most business. Now, maybe we think that's a good thing, but nobody's pointing it out. So I'm the guy pointing it out, saying, look, we've got this race to the bottom. Amazon is competing with everybody. And Amazon's not bad for doing that. They're following the law. Amazon is not the villain. You don't want to demonize Amazon. You want to demonize Congress for setting up the states so that they're in this race to the bottom against each other. Whoever gives Amazon the most money, I wouldn't say wins, but loses the least. They get a company in that'll pay no taxes, but it's better. They got some jobs, and it's better than no company. Congress set that up. And Europe has that problem. They call it levelized tax structure for all the members, so they don't get in this race to the bottom. Now, I'm not trying to get in an argument over this particular race to the bottom, but there are a lot of races to the bottom that happen all the time, and I see it as a role for collective action to limit that happening when it does not serve public purpose. If people get together and think collective action can serve public purpose for something, I don't always agree, but I understand that that's a legitimate place for collective action.
Yeah. Well, let me just say in terms of this collective action, because that's actually something that's really important. And for libertarians, it's really important for us to talk about that, because people do get this preconceived notion. And of course, because libertarians are very individualistic and they want, and people interpret, I have arguments and debates with other libertarians, trust me. But the whole pretense, once again, is collective action is in a voluntary means or in a free market environment. So, with the absence of government, bad things, good things can both happen in the economic sphere. But the beautiful thing about not having a one-size-fits-all approach or force as the ultimate means to the end in any economic exchange or interaction is that actually creates competition. And that's I think competition is what is actually, like I say, takes you from going to the race to the bottom and actually raises and elevate. That's actually, I noticed that actually when I was watching one of your videos, you had mentioned that you're quite into I think you were into building. Were you building cars or racing cars?
I had a car company. Yeah.
Right. So and as you're aware of, and I built my first engine when I was 18 years old in the back of my stepfather's pickup truck. I've always been into it. I was just, even as a small kid, my dad, I learned from him, and then ever since then I've built them. And to me, it's that the fundamentals of understanding not just how an engine put together, like put an intake, a carb, but stepping back and actually understanding the characteristics of how an internal combustion engine works. And then once again, extrapolating that knowledge and figuring things out. So once again, in the economic realm, because I recognize that government is force, taxation is theft, what I would suggest is that's probably, if you want a collective action, then you would at least want to remove that threat of force, which is the only area where that can properly take place or function is in a free market, because all a free market means is just free people. Right. So if free people, individuals, just like myself, how do I discover a price for any particular commodity or service or product? How is by voluntarily offering in any kind of exchange with someone on the other side of it. And the minute we've come to an agreement and we both walk away from that transaction, right? Just like, Milton Friedman with the pencil thing. I give you $1, you give me the pencil. But that completely makes sense. And most people, well, anyone I've ever talked to completely understand that. That's the beauty of the free market of voluntary exchange.
But you have to deal with the disparity of power too, right? So if you're making an exchange with someone who has a gun and you don't, there's a disparity of power.
Well, you see, that's why I personally would advocate for something that's decentralized, where governments can't control, which would be like something like a gold, silver, or a cryptocurrency. Although, as far as I'm concerned, there's been many times in the past, whether you're
but I'm not talking about the money. I'm talking about how do you come to terms with somebody. You have to have, you can't have a major disparity of power, or you don't have a free market.
Well, no, but there's always going to be people who are going to seek power. That's always been the case. But
I understand.
Government is that one entity that creates the pretense that can create monopolies, right? Whereas in the free market environment, And I know you're probably not a fan of Ayn Rand, but I think she did the most amazing job in one of the interviews she did in pushing back. What was it, Mike Wallace, maybe back in the day, that was interviewing her, that said that he set up this scenario that if someone had all of the nuclear fuel or energy in one particular, and she said, there, basically, no one could ever come to monopolize such a thing because it could never become such a required or demanded product, if one person owned it all, right? So it would have never get out to that point where, and so basically what she was saying is, and I would definitely agree there. If once you remove the mechanisms of force, government off the table, then you could actually have access to a multitudes of not just wealth producing, commodities, services, products, or anything else as far as that matter, but because it happens in a voluntary means, then everyone along that chain, every single person without exception, will walk away from that exchange feeling like they have been rewarded or at least properly compensated. Whereas government arbitrary edicts in terms of monetary policy, even things as simple as right now under the current system that you're describing, minimum wages, they're terrible, they're detrimental, not just for the people for multitudes of reasons that have already been described and explained in the past. But I'll even add, because I've known people in my family who've worked in them, and if you see these environments, let's say you have a dozen people all getting paid $14 an hour to work at the grocery store, let's say, everyone sees it, and it's not hard to recognize that Pareto distribution principle. It's real. There's going to be a very small percentage, about 10% of that workforce is going to be doing, probably 50% of the work, but yet everyone's being paid. So you get this point where you're back into that scenario that you were describing earlier, where you're racing to the bottom, where the people who are working the hardest recognize that, why am I continuing to do this when the other person over there, they can take a smoke break every 5 minutes, run to the lunchroom 3 or 4 times in the day, and they're still getting paid the same thing. But that's the thing with this kind of government or any kind of central.
That's called moral hazard.
Yes, exactly.
And what they used to say in Russia was, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I know that expression. And I assure you that's quite apt and applicable in many places in our jurisdictions as well. But see, that's the area, and that's kind of where I'm trying to dig it, because I don't see you like
but again, that's like,
as a guy that's being reasonable. I get that you're trying to figure these things out, but I'm just curious, man to man here. Why would you want to give government? Because we recognize that government. I'm just curious, why wouldn't you want market forces and freedom and independence to create that environment, this economic environment, rather than, and maybe even having competing possibilities. Like right now in the crypto space, you have Bitcoin, you have Ethereum, you end up being a mainstay and something that will reproduce those 3 core values of money, where it can give you exchange value, retain value, and measure value. How that plays out, I don't know. But if as long as no government intervenes to prevent that from taking place in the freedom and what people voluntarily choose to adopt, well, then that's how. And let's say some people want to do it the crypto or Bitcoin way, and other people want to do that. The beauty of the free market is you get to do your thing, and people who want to do your kind of thing and in your own monetary system.
So what's your problem with Bitcoin? You can go buy one, sell, and you can do whatever you want.
I get no problem with them whatsoever.
Okay. Like I say, I'm just wondering why you keep bringing it up, because I don't see a problem.
I don't. I think actually what I think, and this is where I'm getting to, is if we do get to the point, and this is what I believe, is where, let's say you, MMT, because I consider MMT almost like Keynesianism on steroids, right? But is you'll get people
you must have read that you must have read that somewhere. I
may have, but I'm like, I use a lot of on steroids kind of things. I'm one of those guys that come up with my own terminology for lots of stuff. Liberty requires evolution, not revolution. I coined that. I come up with lots of little things, but like I say, at the end of the day, it's competing, whether people are wanting to create currencies or some kind of monetary system. Like I say, under any competition,
people are allowed to create any currency or whatever they want. To me, Bitcoin is an investment vehicle, and I don't know exactly what a currency means, except I know it's not a tax credit. But technically, it's not a tax. You can't use it to pay taxes. So it's not a tax credit like the dollar or others, but it's an investment vehicle like gold or silver. And look, it's a certificate that says you solved the puzzle. Mining is solving a puzzle. If you solve a puzzle, you get a certificate that says you solved the puzzle. That's all it is. Now, why that is valuable, I can go into that on, on another show. I don't want to go into it, but that's what it is. And if people want to earn certificates that say they solve puzzles and somebody else wants to buy them from them, it's their business, okay? And if it goes up to $1 million and if it goes down to 0, it's of no consequence to me. And it should be of no consequence to the government. So it's just another investment vehicle out there that does what it does. Same as the price of gold. The government doesn't care what the price of gold is or the price of silver. That's people making their personal decisions on whether they want to buy it or sell it at that price. Now, when central banks come in and buy gold, I've got a problem with that. That's government now interfering in the market and supporting the price. It's like, why are you doing that? Yeah.
Oh, I definitely agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
But
but at least we can go out and buy and sell all the gold we want. You're free to do it. I'm free to do it. I don't see a problem with that stuff. So I don't even mention it because to me, it's not part of the problem. So let's look at, again, if we get back to MMT, number one, okay, why is it there? Why is it headline news? Why is people hearing it? Because we pointed out that they all have the sequence backwards. Number two, less well known, we've pointed out that the cause of unemployment is taxation by design to get people to work for the money, look for the money so government can hire them. You may not like it, but that's the force at work. If you want to deal with what you see and try and fix it, I think it helps to understand the forces that are creating it. Okay, and the third thing, which I'll bring up now, is that they've got the interest rate thing backwards. When the natural rate, the rate that would be there if the government did not interfere, is 0. And that's what I brought up with Bob Murphy. With a floating exchange rate, which is what we have, fiat currency, tax credits, the rate of interest, the policy rate, the risk-free rate, not the rate you and I would pay, but the policy rate that at the Federal Reserve for balances on their accounts is 0. It only goes above 0 if they take action to support it above 0, either pay interest on reserves or sell treasury securities, which they don't have to do. If they don't do either of those things, the rate stays at 0. So in that sense, from the libertarian sense, the natural rate is 0. And and the burden of proof is on you to show me why they should we should have government intervention to have a rate higher than 0. Now they try and make you think the opposite. Oh, government's suppressing the rate lower than the natural market rate. That's not true for floating exchange rates. It is true for fixed exchange rates like Hong Kong and Bulgaria and the gold standard, but not with today's system. So they've got that thing backwards, the whole interest rate thing. And when they raise rates, they're throwing gasoline on the fire. The government is a big net payer of interest to the economy. They're spewing out more money to people who already have money. Now you might be for or against the government handing out money, but there aren't too many people for the government to hand out $400 or $500 billion a year to people just because they already have money. And that's what paying interest on that thing is. And it's not looked at that way. Again, if the government, if collectively we look at it that way and decide that's a good thing, fine. But that's not the way, it's not being viewed for what it actually is.
Well, so that's the thing. Once again, when you say that,
lowering rates cause inflation to come down, not go up. If you look at Japan, 30 years of 0 rates and no inflation. Europe, 10 years, the US, 10 years. What I'm saying is the 0 rates cause the inflation rate to be lower than otherwise. They've got it backwards. It's to them, it's the carpenter with a piece of wood. No matter how much I cut off, it's still too short. They keep lowering rates to get inflation higher and it keeps going lower. They've got it backwards.
Well, actually, that's the area that I think, especially when you're talking about inflation now, in terms of the Bank of Japan, obviously that's a vast case on its own, but inflation, I even constantly hear, whether you're talking about the governor of the Bank of Canada, or even some of the politicians of the Trudeau regime, or even down in the US, whether it's under Biden or Trump, when they're constantly talking about that, inflation is not there. Well, the problem is the way they describe or way they measure inflation. And as you realize, whether you're talking about the CPI measurement or gauges, everything is.
No, I understand
it. They've changed things to the point where the things that are most important, like I'll tell you in Canada, housing, like having a roof over your head, right, is way more important than that.
So I've got an answer. I've got an answer to that too. But let
me just finish there.
Let me give you the. Okay. But the fourth thing about MMT.
What I'm saying here. So basically, they tell us here in Canada that inflation they're trying to get up to 2% inflation, and they just can't hit that target. But once again, because we all recognize, well, I mean, anyone that pays attention to this is because of the fiat, the exchange of our fiat currencies as it pertains to whether it's US dollar, the Canadian dollar, as comparison or contrast to the yuan or the renminbi, whichever you want. Well, no, renminbi is the inward one. I think the yuan is the outward. Anyways, that exchange rate plays a huge role in the fact that the prices seem to constantly be lowering or decreasing in terms of whether you're buying from Korea or China and stuff like that. Whereas the staples, housing, the roof overhead, which is much more important to me, like I say, than going to the Dollarama and buying a $4 hammer. Right? It's great that I can buy a $4 hammer. I'm not against that entirely, of course. But like I say, the roof over my head, the gas in my tank. Right? We're seeing inflation. Massive inflation actually in Canada, groceries, and it's not just, there's a double entendre when I talk about inflation that most people, even average Canadians that have no idea in terms of monetary policy, are starting to catch on to. Is not just the price increase, but the reduction in like what we use in Canada is our brick of cheese. A brick of cheese used to be 500 grams, half a kilogram is what a brick of cheese used to be. Now they're down to 400, most of them, 400 grams. The prices are continuing to increase, and actually you're getting less of the actual commodities. So it's a double, right? It's a double tax or inflation.
Look at the Swiss. They put holes in it.
Good one. Yeah, that's fine. But and bacon is another one. Bacon used to be considered a pound, right? 454 grams was a pound of bacon. Now they're 375 grams. The price, once again, the price is completely outstripped than what any basic market fundamental would suggest it would be. But because in Canada we have so much supply management, top-down government regulation, and waste, like I say, these are things that have real-world effect. And like I say, all the things that we need to sustain ourselves. So there's definitely a lot of inflation. It's just that the way it's being reported and measured is leaving people that, like I say, even the unsuspecting, the guy that dropped out of grade 8, he's recognizing that they're lying to them. He just doesn't understand, like what you and I do in terms of how that monetary policy and all that stuff plays into it. But that's the kind of people I try to appeal to, and why I wanted to discuss this with you, because there's going to be a lot of laymen that don't understand MMT, how this is going to.
So what MMT tells you, what MMT tells you, what the understanding of monetary operations tells you, is that yes, you have all those issues, but they don't have anything to do with the low interest rates. The low interest rates are actually making it better. High interest rates would make it worse. Okay, and I won't run through the whole analysis, but that's what MMT is about. And you could disagree, but I can give you a pretty heavy analysis. Who's your new Bank of Canada president, Tiff?
Macklemore,
I actually met with him. So I can discuss this at whatever level you want, but I don't want to go into that. But what I do want to go into you with is where the source of the price level comes from. Why do things cost what they do? And there is no mainstream school of economics that can tell you that. They can only tell you what might make it change, but they can't tell you why it is where it is. They can only tell you that, okay, they can't. They don't have a theory for that. Their models don't even have, they don't have money.
No, but there is, and it's the oldest modeling, and actually it's literally economics 101. It's called supply and demand.
Yeah, but that doesn't tell you why the price today is $1. Everything could be 100 times. We could start trading in pennies. Now everything will be 100 times higher, and everything still works. Supply and demand still works. They can't tell you why the price level in dollars, in Canadian dollars, is at this level. They can tell you what's operating, to get it there. But if the whole thing was 10 times higher or 10 times lower, it would operate the same way. Nothing would change. If everybody had 10 times as much income, then everything would just work 10 times higher, right?
Well, I would suggest actually, from my perspective, in terms of the housing market, especially in Canada, the fact that, in particular, if you get in onto that scheme earlier on when government was doing lots of stimulating of the economy, and that happened, back after World War II, right? You got to remember the whole New Deal and that stuff. So yes, people got to get in very early and early on, like I say, and a lot of people.
No, they can tell you. They can tell you. I'm just telling you, as a fact, you can talk to any senior economist. They'll tell you why our prices are going up, or try to. They can understand that. They can understand why they change. They can't understand the starting point, the source of the price level. They don't have that. It's not in any of their models. But MMT knows exactly the source of the price levels. So I've given you four MMT things, the sequence, the unemployment, the what we just went over, and now the source of the price, the interest rates, now the source of the price level. Okay, let's go back to Africa. The British say the tax is so much. How much do they pay for a day's work in a coffee plantation? Where does that come from? Okay, they have to decide because they're the monopolist. Monopolists are price setters. They're not price takers. Okay, when you have competition, you have to assume numerous sellers and numerous buyers. You can't just have one, because then you don't have competition. Then you don't have a free market. You have a monopoly. Okay, whether it's a state-sponsored monopoly or some guy, in Somalia with a Humvee with guns and it's his monopoly, but there's a monopolist. Or the drug guy with a monopoly in the neighborhood. Okay, monopolists set price. Now I know there are limits, and they can make a mistake in the sense that they could set a price that has bad effects, but then they have to change the price. It doesn't change unless they change it. The public utility that has the whole city, they set the price. There's not some auction continuously, because you have one seller, one provider, one supplier. That supplier, the single supplier, is price setter. The government and its agents, the collective thing we call government, is the single supplier of the tax credit, of the dollars, of the Canadian dollars. They are setting price when they spend, whether they know it or not, whether you know it or not. There's no, as a point of logic, they're setting the terms of exchange. We'll give you $40,000 to be a soldier. We'll give you $100,000 to be a judge. We'll give you, money for being alive, and now you're my agent when you go spend it, and you're now setting price for me, which is very insidious, right? And so what the government has the money that we need, or else we're going to lose our house and our car. It's coercive. They are setting terms of exchange when they spend. End of story. And that's where it all starts. Now, that understanding doesn't so much tell you what to do, but it tells you what not to do. It gives you a lot of things that we're doing about inflation that don't work and give bad results because our policymakers, our economists don't understand that source of the price level. So that's the fourth thing I'm going to have time to discuss about MMT. And these are all critical for understanding, for having an informed decision made about these important issues that you've brought up. Okay, and so I've been doing this for 30 years, trying to get these four things understood so we could have better inputs into our policy. That's all I can tell you.
Right, but once again, a little bit of pushback to that would be, so once you start down the road, and I definitely recognize that, like, government using force and setting prices is something that has taken place. But once again, that to me, it takes me back to the same thing, shrinking it down to the microcosm in my own personal situation or any kind of setting, which is, if I use force, to, like, if I did that in a family or in my own community setting where I'm the one that's arbitrarily setting prices. Well, it's going to be as what it is because we humans do have free will as far as we know, right? There's always going to be people that are going to try to escape, right? The minute you've set some arbitrarily price, whether it's a floor or a ceiling, there's going to be someone going to try to escape that and find some market mechanism where they can find a different price discovery on their own. So as a government, which is why government constantly from Keynesian right on till now, why it continues to grow exponentially to the point where now you don't not just need central banks, but you need coordination of central banks all over the globe, is because people are going to try always to find ways to get out from being
sure they're going to try. But let's go back to the situation in Africa. You live in a village, you have this tax you have to pay. The only source of the crown, right, is the government, the British paying 10 a day to work on the coffee plantation. There's no way around that. You could get somebody else to do it for you if you had influence. Send your mother out to go to work, okay. But as far as the government's concerned, they're going to get their people, and if the tax is 10,000 and they pay 10 a day, they're going to get 1,000 days work, at least. They're going to get extra because people are going to want to save. Okay, that's just a fact based on this double coercion, the tax and the single supplier of what you need to pay the tax. And that's what you're up against with government right now. So what I'd like to think is that I've enlightened you somewhat on what you're actually up against in your discussions. I'm not giving you the answers. You've got your
No, okay. I definitely know what I'm up against. I actually
I think you know more now what you're up against.
I definitely appreciate all the added input that you give. Once again, I've always understood, well, at least for the last decade that government is, by natural extension, a monopoly of force of violence, and taxation is theft, and the fact that it's basically, it's all built on mysticism, to be honest with you, because I don't have any authority to dictate anyone's lives, nor do I have any authority. Like, I can't delegate any authority that I don't have, and government can't. Government literally pretends that people can delegate authorities they don't have onto other human beings.
Well,
so
government has been given taxing authority by the Constitution.
Well, no. Well, what it is, here's what it is. It's just like in the past,
and the means to enforce it. Okay, and so
like in the past that human slavery was accepted, right? It was the belief. The only reason why slavery existed as a structure, as an institution, was because people believed in it. The minute you remove that belief, like today, we're still quasi slaves, but we no longer believe that actual human ownership, where some other human being says, okay, this person is my property. Nobody, well, I'm sure some people do, but right.
Look, we are all,
and it's that belief in authority that gives governments the ability to do what you've been saying, and why they've been getting away with it for centuries, for millennia, to be honest with you. But I would suggest I would suggest all, not just like the Gutenberg press played a key role to bring about the Enlightenment era and getting economics out from under, the king being the divine right of the king. I would suggest in 2021, in the information age, where we can have real world exchanges like we're doing today in real time, in long forms, uninterrupted. I would say if this is continued unabated and unrestricted, unencumbered for much longer, I would suggest we may get to the point where we might go through another intellectual evolution. I've coined it actually Enlightenment Era 2.0, where people will no longer believe. And once you've removed that belief in these authorities, they've lost all power entirely over your purse. Right?
It's already happened. We've had a former president lead an invasion of physical invasion of Congress where people were killed. You can't say it's not happening.
Oh, for sure, it's happening, and that's why I'm saying, which is why I don't know why you would want to advocate for anything where government's going to have central planning control.
All right, well, you've got to stop. If anything else, I guess I haven't been successful in convincing you that that's not what I'm advocating for anything.
Okay, actually, yeah. So let's get to that point, because that's the part that I think maybe. So I get you're helping to describe the current system, but MMT suggests that you still maintain most of the current structures of the system. That's like,
no, it's not saying that at all.
Okay,
what we're saying is if you have a goal of no inflation, 2% inflation, I will show you how to do that through my understanding of the monetary system. If you have a goal of full employment, I will show you how to do that. If you want the people who are unemployed to transition back to the private sector, I will show you how to do that, because they were taken away by the government. If you want them to work in the public sector, I will show you how to do that. I can show you how this tool called the monetary system works and how to use it for specific goals within the system. If you don't like any of it and you want to change the system, abandon it, eliminate taxation, I'm not saying, you certainly have a right to move in that direction. I'm saying that I'm trying to have people make more informed decisions by giving you the information as to how this, look, everybody out there has got these diesel cars and they're arguing about the right spark plugs, okay? And I'm trying to say, look, there are no spark plugs in a diesel. It's a compression fired thing. I'm not telling you to drive a diesel or drive a gasoline car. I'm just trying to get the debate on, the actual terms of that are grounded in the operation of the system. So what I've told you are are how the system works. It's bulletproof. It's tied into, it tells you how the debits and credits work, where the forces are. And if you want to then do something about it, now you've got the raw material to go out and do it.
Right. But what you're describing is, once again, the only way that scenario works, and I think you would agree to this, is because you keep using that, and even a couple of the gentlemen that
it only works with coercive taxation.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So without
that's my opening line. That's number one in MMT. This system is based entirely on coercive taxation.
Right.
That's our opening line. So that's not the same as advocating for it.
Right. Well, I'm very glad that you actually point that out, because that's a very important key factor. And if people are listening to you in terms of the monetary school or whatever of MT, at least they're getting that basis and understanding. Because to me, like I say, how things are going to play, I don't know. I'm not a central planner. I've never played one.
So
on
let
TV.
me add one more thing. There are a lot of MMT proponents out there, who are totally out in the weeds. Okay,
that's
There are a lot of Keynesian economists that Keynes would not agree with. Okay.
Yeah.
But look, I'm the source of the monetary side of all of this, and of the monetary operations side. I started this in 1992, I think, within the financial sector. And these are people who, central bankers, people like that. I introduced it to the academic community maybe 3 years later in 1996, and I've been working with them. But both communities have developed proponents who are way out there. Okay, but that's just the way it is.
I would assume those in the academic field, or anyone who predominantly come from the public sector, they're probably fine and accepting any of these policy procedures. Because I got to tell you, I've got a few of them in my family.
They're not
on the greatest. We're not on the greatest footing, but these people have no clue how value is actually created.
I'm telling you, the Keynesians are still, out there telling me I'm wrong, and disputing things that are accounting identities. It's just madness. They've been bypassed. Okay. It's like, libertarians. I'm sure there's a lot of libertarians who are way out there, right? You guys are not all the same. Right? It's the same thing with MMT proponents.
Right,
but
exactly.
If you get back to the source, this is it here, what I'm telling you.
But do you believe, let me bring one.
I've got to go to another meeting.
Oh, you have another meeting? Oh, because I had lots more there, Warren. But anyways, I don't want to take up
too much. We can do this again anytime you want.
Yeah, for sure, Warren. Actually, that's what I want to do, because I at least wanted to bring you on today and to show you, that I'm not here to just try to play a got you and, like, I don't know, I won against some guy that I'm not interested in that at all.
Look, let me tell you something. I am hoping that you would do that so I could stop doing this and get a life. Okay, but so far, after 30 years of people of all levels, it hasn't happened. So here I am, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, like I say, then we'll if you wouldn't mind, Warren, like I say, I wouldn't mind reaching out to you again, because there was quite a lot that I didn't quite get to.
Okay.
But I like the free flow of the conversation. You know what I mean? So that's why I kind of let it just kind of go in its natural course.
Yeah.
I would have obviously liked to have been able to get to a little bit more of the there's a lot more that I wanted to dig down into it. But once again, I'm appreciative. Okay. You did take the time out today, and you would maybe at some point in time, in the not so distant future, if we could maybe touch down on this topic again, and we'll hammer out a little bit more of these ideas. But I do really appreciate you coming on here and have this chat with me today.
Good. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good one, Warren. Take it easy.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, folks. So I unfortunately didn't quite get to like I said, I wanted to let him get all as much information out as he wanted to, and because I want to be fair to anyone that I have an interview with. I'm not the short-term thinking kind of guy, right? I want to dig down deep into these kinds of conversations or debate, and like I say, hopefully I'll be able to get that opportunity at some point. And I'll just throw this out for you folks that are in the chat here, because just to throw out a few things. And actually, I was going to do this first, and I probably should have. What are your underlying principles that guide your decisions, perspective, and opinions regarding economics as it pertains to real human beings? Or are you just making a utilitarian argument? Because as you recognize, if government is force, I can make the utilitarian or the utility argument that using force, can benefit. Well, especially if you're the one on the receiving side of that force, it can be beneficial not just to individuals, but entire collectives, no doubt. But it comes at the expense, right, of someone else. It's not just, wealth isn't just magically created out of nowhere. It somehow, when you're talking about these schemes, something is being harmed, or someone is being harmed, right? When you're picking winners or losers of the economy. And I always like to know is what are your underlying morals, your ethics, or the principles that guide your decisions? And that can usually help expand on a lot from a person's thought process. And another one too is, although we already got that government is a monopoly of force. So yes, so that, and he agreed. I didn't get the chance to, now once again, I don't like getting too personal about this stuff with people, but I will say, John Maynard Keynes himself, he didn't have any children, and from what I gather, I believe he might have even been gay. Nothing against that, once again, but if you have no offspring or successive generations that you got to think about, right? And I didn't get to the point of asking him, and I feel bad about this, which is why I don't want to straw man. I don't want to misrepresent the man in any way, but I would have liked to ask the question because I heard another lady that's a proponent of MMT say, and the big thing about the deficit myth, right? It's like, well, no, because each generation that comes along, right, taxation goes towards paying off the debts or the deficits that were accumulated from past or prior generations. So economically enslaving, entire generations to pay for, the malfeasance or the bad choices, economic choices from people in the past, right? I would like to ask Warren, what are your thought processes on that? Why, now, if you don't have kids, right, you're not thinking about that. Not to suggest that he's a bad person in any particular way. Like I said, I don't know the man well enough to make a judgment as far as that goes. But if you don't have kids, you're maybe not thinking about, like the long-term effect or that intergenerational effect that big government and deficits and debts and money printing might have, right? And that's just one aspect of it, right? There's also the inflation aspect of it, the loss in productivity and purchasing power. There's all kinds of other areas too. And of course, any system or structure that is built on the use of force as a means to the end will always appeal to and entice the worst among us to join and control them. Power corrupts. So this is what I was going to get to too. Like, is if government, is in control, what I recognize is the current system today. And this is an area, like I say, I agree with Warren in terms of his description of this underlying structure, but I would suggest, and I think he would probably, or at least I would hope he would tend to agree, that it's quite corrupt in nature and causing a tremendous amount of harms, economic and social harms to a lot of people. So why advocate for the continuation or ramping up basically this current system? But once again, I don't want to, like I say, the last thing I want to do is straw man or misrepresent anyone. So I'm going to put this away. Like I said, I had lots and lots lined up that I wanted to get to. And like I say, I'll reach out to Warren, maybe give it a month or so. Not sure, but give it some time and I'll reach out and possibly we'll have another subsequent conversation. Maybe, get it set up so that it's more just boom, question and answer kind of deal. But like I say, I want to at least get to know the man, give him the time to expand upon his thought processes and the description of the current system. So I don't know. I think it was all right. I think it was pretty good, right? And like I say, we'll get to the bottom of this kind of stuff at some point in time. All we really require is, like I say, to be able to engage and interact with each other. There's nothing we humans can't do that we can't accomplish if we put our minds to it. And one mind, right, is a great, and it can be very powerful, extremely powerful. But multiple minds coming together, right? This is the kind of collective action that I'm all for. But once again, it has to be built and based upon us treating each other with dignity and respect and recognizing each other's individual sovereignty and our liberty and using voluntary means rather than government as a means to an end. And like I say, the sky's the limit in terms of how we get out from underneath this current destructive structure that incentivizes only the worst of the worst among us and really bad habits and behaviors. So anyways, I'm just going to check through the comment section here, see what's going on. I see Steve's in the chat. Or Stuart, what's going on? Stuart, my friend, what's up, y'all? Look at that. Ooh, look at all the emojis. Hey, what's going on, Tax Sleeve? I love that username. That's the best. My government is my enemy. Don't call it your government. Yeah. That's calling it my government almost sounds Stockholm syndrome. Just kidding. Just joking. But yeah, I get what you're saying there. Banning government is a trap. Oh, blaming government. Yeah. Yeah. Well, belief, right? The belief. Government and the belief thereof. I'd say both of them go hand in hand, right? What's not sure what's that at? Oh, pirate flags. Sky Lowry, what do libertarians actually believe in? That's a great question, Sky Lowry, and let me help you with that. So, libertarians believe in self-ownership. I am me and no other human being or entity, right? In case they exist, right? But nothing in the universe has any legitimate claim of ownership over me. I am me, right? Nobody owns me, right? So self-ownership. I am me. I own myself. And because I own myself, it naturally extends into my property rights, which is anything that I produce and provide as a concept of self-ownership, my intellect, the ideas, or what I produce in the physical realm in terms of labor, right? Or the combination of labor with resources or tools is whatever I create and construct is mine. Nobody gets to claim ownership over that other than me. And then the third tenet and an important principle of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle, that people should not use preemptive force, violence, or theft as a means to an end. Don't hit, don't steal, don't rape, don't kill, right? Pretty simple concepts. Matter of fact, most of us, if you were really raised, with Christian fundamental values, right? And the 10 commandments, even if you weed them down a little bit, right, to three core principles, they're basically aligned with, like I say, those fundamental values and principles of Christianity, which is the individual, the sovereignty of the individual, like I say, self-ownership, property rights, and the non-aggression principle. It is not moral or ethical to use violence, force, theft, or anything like that towards a fellow man. And all of those things, because they're negative rights, mean they can be universalized. Where any right that someone claims to be positive, so when people say, I have a right to health care, well, that's a positive right, right? A negative right is I have the right for people not to use force against me. Yes, you can universalize that out, and that is how a proper ethic, plays out. Is it has to be universal, it has to be consistent, and it can't be contradictory in nature. Whereas a positive right, if I say that I have a right to health care, well, how could I have a right to health care when I don't have the ability to provide that health care? Someone else has to provide that for me. So if I say I have a right to it, then that means I have some right or authority to force someone, right, to provide that service. And no, that there's no such thing as a positive right. This stuff has been talked about and debunked extensively by lots of figureheads in the past, but I'm going to help reiterate it now. Is no, you can't put forth any premise or pretense that you have a right to force anybody to do anything other than to not use force, violence. Like I say, there are some things that can be universalized and many, many things that can't. And that's usually the best descriptive form to help you understand what is a proper right and what isn't. What is a privilege or an entitlement, right? But hopefully I answered your question in terms of what do libertarians actually believe in? Because that is a really important question, Sky Lowry. That's a really good. Hey, what's going on, Mr. G. Rich? Thank you for joining the stream, my friend. It's all good. Hopefully you got it all. And if you did not, yeah, you can always go back and check it out a little later. What's going on? Jesus. Hey, Jesus. Hallelujah. Ayn Rand, the one that went on government food stamps. I love how people like to use that, right? Government's like, listen, people go on government programs, and if you're intellectual enough to realize that government is inherently immoral, unethical, and these are terrible things, but hey, they're stealing from me. That's the thing. If you're willing to recognize, hey, government steals from me every day or every paycheck or every time I consume anything, right? Or anytime if I own a property and the tax, if you understand these things, that government is by its definition using force and theft as its means to end towards you, and constantly claiming ownership over a portion of your income or your wealth, the fact that you're willing to try to get a little bit of that back, and once again, I get how it can go terribly negative, but that is just a reality. When someone is stealing from you and you want to get a little bit of that back, at least if you understand that. Now, if you're just someone that don't even understand what government is, and you just, I want to get me some freebies at someone else's expense, yes, that makes you an unethical and immoral person. Whereas Ayn Rand fully understood, acknowledged as much, suggested that, I don't want government to provide me with anything. I want zero from government. But since government is already stealing large portions of my income or my productivity and squandering wherever they choose to, right? Picking winners or losing the economy. Yeah, sure. I want to get a little bit of that back. But does that make her unethical? I mean, you have to be willing to override, ignore, and overlook the fact that government, like someone has already forcefully taken from that woman before you can suggest that she's somehow inherently immoral for clawing back a little bit of what the government took from her. But I get it. It is a, to be honest with you, Jesus or Jesus, it's really tired, man. I mean, that'll play to some people. And if you put that, like, I'm sure to a socialist, right? Oh, they'd be sucking that up and they'd be applauding you, Jesus. They'd be like, yeah, Jesus, yeah. Of course, if you talk to them just a little while longer and figure out how intellectually vigorous they are in their thinking, you might not be so happy with the kind of people who are applauding or giving you accolades, right? So that's the thing. Who do you want to surround yourself with? Knuckle draggers, the people that are the ones that don't think critically, or maybe people like myself? Because it seems like the fact that you're watching this video, maybe you're curious, or I don't know, maybe you're friends with someone else, and maybe you're not a fan of Ayn Rand. I don't know. Like I say, I think the woman was, and the fact that you're saying that she went debunk anything that she said. How about you try to actually go against her ideas? That's one thing I've never seen any of the people that are haters of Ayn Rand. I've never heard one of them debunk anything that she's ever said. Attack her personal character. Oh yeah, I get that all the time. But debunk any of her philosophical thought processes or concept, not so much. He's definitely jacked up on whatever he's getting at. Right on, David. Like I say, we were getting there, folks. We were getting there, and like I say, I'm appreciative that he did come on and have this conversation. Just caught in, missed a bunch. Yeah, sorry about that, Lamb Knot. You can check this out after I type the stream, which will be shortly. I'm just, like I say, just going through the comments, see what everyone's up to. I remember the last MMT stream, the MMT guy was flustered. This time, Mr. Canadian Libertarian seems flustered. He keeps thinking Mr. Mosler is advocating MMT rather than he's explaining how it functions. But modern monetary theory is something that he thinks is both descriptive and prescriptive. I think he even acknowledged as much, and so have a lot of other people that follow his school of thought. So that's why I had this conversation with today. Now, hopefully, by him, maybe if it is the case that Warren Mosler, if he's not advocating for MMT, well, then that's a great clarifying thing. And thank you for pointing that out there, Jesus. I do appreciate that, because maybe just maybe this stream, if people haven't understood it in the past, will help expand on the fact that based on what Jesus is saying and his interpretation of Warren Mosler's response here in this stream, is he doesn't advocate. And actually, I would even agree that it seemed based on some of the pushback that he was given towards me in terms of whether I was saying, or when I was suggesting, are you suggesting this is prescriptive or descriptive? Then I would actually agree with you there, Jesus. Maybe it is the fact. Maybe it is a fact entirely, and maybe I'll get to figure that out in our next chat, that Warren Mosler does not advocate for MMT. And why wouldn't he? Maybe he recognizes that it won't work either, because he didn't seem like to be, I mean, he had, things to say negative towards John Maynard Keynes, Keynesian economics. And like I've said before, Keynesian economics, well, MMT is basically Keynesian economics on steroids. So, hey, if he's just descriptive in terms of suggesting what MMT is, then I'm with you there, Warren. I'm with you. So let's figure out something else here. And like I say, there's already lots of great minds out there doing just that, which is why some of these cryptocurrencies or actual commodity based, that's another thing we never got to too, is there are actually commodities or cryptocurrencies that are coming out today. There are some out there in the real world today that are not just cryptocurrencies, but also backed by a tangible commodity such as gold and silver. Shout out to LoadPay and the fine folks over there for offering that, a silver-backed cryptocurrency. What a great idea and concept that is. So yeah, so if that's the case, Jesus, that's, like I say, I'm great. And once again, I have no animosity towards Warren Mosler. I don't know the man enough, right? So if he's not an advocate, and basically based on what he said and what you're suggesting here, he's not advocating for MMT, then that should be something that maybe a lot of the people who are fans of the MMT school probably should learn, right? That he's just pointing out, what things can happen. And if you want to keep the current very corrupt structure in place, then these are some of the descriptive measures that you would take place. If you want to continue using force, violence, and theft as your means to use I'm against it, and maybe like you are against it, Jesus, then we're all in the same boat, I guess. Well, so to speak, right? Proverbially, in being not just against the current system, but looking for ways to disrupt it entirely. And I'm completely on board. Like I say, I personally have chosen to delve into finding ways to protect myself against the ultimate, not just collapse, but potential, whether it's through the inflation, deflation, but the constant manipulation of my worth and what I produce and provide in society in terms of economics. But yeah, thanks for mentioning that there. Hey, Rand Paul, good one. Rand Paul's awesome. Rand Paul would definitely like to see some more from this conversation. Right on, John Doe. Yes, and like I say, I will hopefully get an opportunity to have another chat. Late. Is Warren still on? Yeah, sorry about that botched Mandela. No, he had to go. He had another prior arrangement. Well, we did get to go an hour and a half. We did cover some pretty good stuff. Although, like I say, there was definitely a lot more to the conversation. I was maybe a little bit longer getting into the weeds of it because, like I said, I didn't want to just go too hardcore on the guy. I wanted to give him the time to explain, get his. I wanted to treat the man fair and respectful, and hopefully I did so. And like I say, we'll get an opportunity to talk again. Let me move on here. Leon Fisher, you definitely need a follow-up chat. Yes, I would agree. He would have a very clear answer to the question about whether debts are passed from generation. Awesome. That's really important. That's what I want to because that's a intergenerational theft is something that as a father of two sons, something that not just me but affects a tremendous amount of people. So yeah, but thanks for mentioning that, Leon Fisher, and thank you for joining the stream. Appreciate that. Okay, let me go back up here. Okay. Okay, here we go. I don't have offspring, but I want investments to benefit all our citizens and future citizens. Why do I need offspring to believe that? Well, if you had kids, you would firmly grasp and understand that. It's hard to explain it until you've been placed in that position, right? But because you have an automatic instinct, because unless that's not necessarily true either. Actually, that's not a universal. Actually, there are some parents that don't give a flying rat's ass about their kids. Actually, there are some parents that see their children as competitors in the marketplace, right? Of not just ideas, but in the social and economic realm, and want nothing more to keep them under their thumb, right? So that's not universal, but good, decent, moral, upstanding people, you don't want to place any burdens, hardships, or harms on your kids, knowing that life is difficult enough as it is. So when you actually have your own kids, like I say, you really there is no replacement for that, right? And I get it. You can try your best, and I've tried my best, to put myself in positions of people that I've never been in. And I try to do my best to explain or to better understand people in those positions. But at the end of the day, right, to have that real world applicable knowledge, you have to put yourself in that position. Because then you have that entire 18-year timeline at least, right? Or so when you're raising you can't imagine the kind of things that play out over the course of those at least 18 years that will change so many areas of your minds and how you think about things or perceive things, right? Whereas when it's just you yourself and like when you're done, like that's it, right? Like once, like, if you're a single person and you're done, sure, you might claim to care about some people in the future, and maybe you do, but it's not going to be the same as, if you have that true love for your kids, kids that you put your own skin, blood, toiled and sweat and tears into raising and educating, informing and doing all that stuff. Trust me, there's real world applicable experience that is kind of required and needed for you to have that full grasp or understanding. Not suggesting that you can't do your best to try to think about these things, And I don't know you as a person, but it definitely helps a tremendous amount. I'm not sure he's arguing for it. Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? It maybe not. Maybe not. He's just describing a theory on how the current system operates. Yeah. So, well, that's basically Keynesianism, right? Because that's what Keynesian economics were. That's how governments are run today. Keynesian economics, where you give government, right, the ability to just print money to stimulate the economy, and then like tax it to get some of that. So yeah, so like you say, in the descriptive form, yes, I agree. He's definitely describing Keynesian economics, but it's that Keynesian economics that has gotten us to the place today where, most people are disenfranchised with the system and finding or seeking alternative methods or measures to have economic exchange or some kind of different alternative monetary policy or monetary system. Keynesian was that bad that people are today willing to completely throw out the baby with the bathwater and to start completely anew. Right. So Keynesianism was a big old fail for some. It was a boom for others, right? If you're part and parcel of government, if you're the recipient of those proceeds of theft or forced wealth and income redistribution, you're doing great. And people on that side of the equation, you're always going to hear those people that are like, yeah, Keynesianism is great. MMT is great. But if you're on the opposing side of that, the one that's have to force to produce and provide and not seeing that kind of proper compensation for a result or as a result or a consequence of that genuine labor and that value and the intellect that you provide that's not being properly measured or gauged, then yeah, you're not so happy or keen with that. Once again, this is where the perspectives truly break down and where there's a genuine divide is, are you the taker or the maker? Because trust me, you'll see it's like almost perfectly correlated. You could put it on a graph. It's like, holy shit, that's a perfect, look at that. The makers, not a big fan of big government central planning and people that have this arbitrary ability to destroy your productivity, your wealth, and the value of that productivity and your labor and your wealth. And those are like, I don't care. Just give me some cheddar. Just give me the cheddar. Those people, two totally different mindsets, two totally different constructs even in terms of ethics or morality, right? So yes, totally, which is why you'll never create a situation or scenario where it's going to be a one size fits all that's going to benefit everyone. Once again, it's always about picking winners or losers in the economy. And like I say, the losers have been winning in the economic sense for a long time now. How about giving the actual winners a leg up for once, right? I think it'd be great. But yeah, thanks. Yeah, I thought it was a great conversation as well, Jesus. Really appreciate that. It can't be a very good system. In the mind of most MMTers, it can't be a very good system if used properly. Once again, I can't speak for anyone else other than myself. I haven't heard any MMTer oppose the basic structure, but more how it's misused. Right. That's what I was trying to get to, right? So what about this one? So what about freely entering into debt contracts? Should people be liable to go into indentured servitude or debtors' prisons? Not sure what you mean. If you're freely entering, well, I mean, a debt contract, yeah. If you, there's nothing. If you voluntarily choose, like if you go to a bank, right, or anyone, like if I come to me and if you say I'd like to borrow $1,000, but I'll give you, $1,100 back and call it an interest rate and figure out what that would be over a certain time frame or the length of the loan, let's say, and you've chosen to compensate me in excess of what I've loaned you because the fact that I've given you that money and I could use that money that might have been going towards things that are more productive, or maybe I would have got a higher rate of return, then yes, for sure. There's, as long as it's voluntarily, once again, but I don't know why you would use something as simple or something like describing should people be liable to go into indentured servitude or debtor's prison. I mean, what human being would you be talking about that would want to enter into indentured servitude or a debtor's prison? I'm not quite sure what that question means there, Bosch Mandela. Maybe if you want to clarify it, I'll check it out a little further down. Or should the government outlaw ownership of people? Government is the ones who claim ownership over people, basically, right? What do you think SIN numbers and what do you think those bonds are? What do you think a government bond is, right? It's basically government claiming to own the value of your labor and sell it to other people and investors. So government is not the answer. Government is the exact opposite of that. Government is the ones who claims ownership over people. So I'm not sure where you're coming up with that one, Boss Mandela. And it can look at World War II. MM2 was implemented and government dictate all resources go to fight the war. In return, people get their needs met with limited wants because of the war. After the war, the returned soldiers and women working the assembly line were able to have kids, boomers. They bought house and cash and their cars and cash, which then trickled down to boomers being able to move out of the house at 14, 15, 16, or whatever they said they left it. That was actually just a normal, it had nothing to do with monetary policy, but historically people moving out of their houses at younger ages. I was just, society was not so infantilized, in those times. And it's not just them. Talk to some, there are not a whole lot of them left today, but talk to some folks from the silent generation, the greatest generation, or even generation. Well, you won't find any of them any older than the silent generation, that's for sure, because they're pretty much all past this point in time. But actually moving out of the house and becoming responsible at a young age was quite normal historically, and not just for one small demographic called boomers. Okay. Do you believe that we should have no collective action at all? If no, then how do we organize for that collective action? Is that not government? No, collective action. Like I do collective action all the time, right? If me and a bunch of my buddies, right, decide we want to go out for a big rip on our four-wheelers, that's a collective action. Or if we want together to create a charity or crowd fund, to help someone out because their house burnt down, they didn't have house insurance, that's collective action. I am not against collective action, right? Collective action, but it has to be voluntary, right? When you're talking about government, and as it pertains to collective action, government, and Warren himself even acknowledged, is a representation of force and violence. So that kind of collective action is someone using force. I mean, the minute someone puts a gun to your head or proverbially threatens you with force, right, without actually physically holding the gun up to your head, like the politicians and the ruling class and enforcers do today, they don't necessarily always pull out the gun, but it's implied, it's implicit that threat of force is right there, backing up their collective action, right? So once again, you have to properly define, what are you talking about when you're talking about collective action? Am I against it? No, as long as it's voluntary. But once again, the minute force or violence or the threat thereof is involved, then, collective, a gang, like I said to Warren, a gang coming up here in my driveway to steal my car, right? That's a collective action. But of course I'm against that. Big time. And you should be too, right? Pretty sure you're against collective action if that collective is coming after you or your things, right? Or someone you care about. So come on, we got to be a little bit more clear. That's why, like I said at the very starting of the conversation, and why it was really important to be the clarity of language is clarity of mind, right? All these words have actually described definitions and meanings. And once again, I stick to them rather than try to reinterpret or reinvent them. Anyways, I'm just going to scroll down, see if there's anything else down here. New Offspring song. New Offspring song. Let's go on. You got to keep them liberated. Nice, Freedom. Nice. I'm with you, G Rich. I'm with you. But anyways, MMT is post-Keynesian. It does kind of seem that way. But anyways, like I say, I really enjoy you folks joining the stream with me today. Like I say, I'll be looking forward to our next conversation with Warren, and I'll be definitely looking for other people to reach out to. Actually, John Hicks, I got to reach out to John. We got to have a chat here soon. We've been kind of trying to set something up here for a little while. Tim Mullen, I'm probably going to reach out to Tim again. He's been putting out some great material. Tim Mullen, the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, great guy. Probably be looking to reach out to him again. And yeah, anyone else out there, like any of you folks in this stream, in the chat, if you ever want to have a conversation, engage in some dialogue, debate, or discussion with me, I'm always willing to do so. So, reach out to me on any of my social media pages, and we'll get her done. We'll get her done. And like I say, I'll be looking forward to finding more and more people to have conversations, debates, and discussions with. Because like I say, at the end of the day, that's what's going to help us, folks, is sitting down and talking and discussing and hammering out these ideas. That's what's going to be required. That's what's going to be needed and necessary if we're going to escape this current paradigm. And I'm sure, just like you, there's a lot of other people out there who maybe not privy to this video or listen to conversations of this are in the same boat, in the same position. So maybe you folks, and I'll do my best to try to help out, to help reach out to some of these people and bring them into the conversation. Because right now, if you're not part of the conversation as it pertains to those who are disrupting the status quo or the establishment, or you're just playing along with the current establishment, and you're not getting much out of that unless, like I say, you're a part of the establishment. And that still represents a minority. There's still a majority of us in any country who aren't part and parcel or benefactors of big government, the state. So far, there's still a majority of people who are forced and thrust into paying for that minority who's benefiting at all of our expense. Anyways, you folks have a great day. We'll see you in the next live stream. It's Canadian Libertarian. I love liberty.